Hello everybody. Welcome. Especially want to thank those of you who are new to my channel and giving me a little bit of attention. I work pretty hard to produce quality content. I'm not here to blow my own horn or parade around like I'm something special. What I'm interested in is learning how to see better together, trying to understand what the actual potentials of our human nature are, how those were lost, how we might recover them together. So this is what you're going to find me exploring. And some of the older material, you're gonna see like a radical difference in the depth and the level of inspiration in some of my older material, because back in the days when I was younger and the experiences that forged my mind were more fresh. There's some very profound stuff back there. You'll find a little bit of mania back there too. But if you don't find a little bit of mania, you're probably looking in the wrong place, because our actual nature as human beings is so staggering that if exposure to it doesn't light you up, you're probably mostly dead inside, or you're just, you've been turned into some kind of a conceptual and sensorial zombie by the ceaseless impoverishments of our common anti-cultures and ridiculous domineering paradigms. So yeah, I encourage you to do the archaeology, go back in time, especially to the historical epoch in my channel where you'll see the same image, looks sort of like a little satellite, right? And there's some kind of a code word. Those are the early days, and some of that stuff I think you'll find very, at the very least entertaining, if not astonishing and inspiring. So yeah, I'm so glad to have some new subscribers. I think a lot of that is probably due to some of it's due to interviews with Lee Gerard Barlow, who I'm going to be doing another interview with on this coming Wednesday. Super excited about that. And then also Alan Steinfeld and Henrietta Weeks, who I should be having another interview with on Monday or Tuesday of the coming week. I'm working on getting some other interview subjects, which I'll keep quiet for the moment. I also think, some of the new people are here because of my discussion of Amon Hillman, who is certainly a maniac, but a rather interesting one. I've got an essay about him coming out shortly on my Medium channel. You can find me there if you just look for Darren Stevenson on Medium. I think my channel is called @Organelle. If I've got that, if I remember that correctly. So, yeah, please take a moment to ask a question. If you do in fact like the content, like it, share it. Anything that helps me grow my audience is very powerful in its ability to empower me to continue this work. And I'm profoundly thankful to my my Patreon supporters. I do have a Patreon. You want to throw me $1 every month, that means a lot, because if there's a few of you that do that, that adds up quickly. So that's $12 a year. I also have a a PayPal account. You can make a direct donation if you care to. I very rarely solicit patronage, but it's extremely helpful for me. Even though, what I actually earn from patronage is about, these days, around $140 a month. Pretty minimal. And I pay out some patronage to others whose work is important to me as well. So yeah, take a moment, ask a question, share an experience, an insight, share your thoughts. Like or, dislike the video. Share it, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Grateful that you're all here and that I'm still vertical after all these years and can walk around and still physically able-bodied and somewhat able-minded. I've been listening over the past couple days to something I very rarely pay any attention to, Joe Rogan. But I was curious to see his interview with David Grusch, former top-level intelligence officer with the United States military, whistleblower on the topic of UFOs. I learned quite a bit. I've been following Grusch since approximately May of last year. And I've written a long essay on the history of the UFO phenomenon in the United States. It's on my Medium channel. There's actually a couple essays of related topic there. I've been following UFOs since I was 6 or 7 years old, so you're talking, late 60s, late 1960s. Long before this was a cult phenomenon, though it always had a bit of the perhaps both the stigma and the shining of the non-ordinary about it. Yeah, when I was a kid, I read Chariots of the Gods by von Daniken. I was fascinated by Egyptology. Read the Egyptian Book of the Dead when I was 11. I was a voracious reader as a child, and I don't know if I still qualify because I'm not doing a lot of reading these days, but I have a huge library and an active bookshelf. So I've been fascinated by this since I was a child. I think the inspiration of my fascination is relatively simple. There must be actually intelligent other beings in the universe. And those of you who know my work know that I very commonly argue that there's actually intelligent other beings all around us. Because their mode doesn't match ours, our species generally doesn't recognize them, and science is only kind of starting. Not that science is one thing, it's not. But there are people within science who are well aware that we are surrounded not merely by intelligences, but by transsentience. We just don't have language or models to talk about it yet. So, yeah, I think, if what we mean by intelligence is builds machines, then we're the only one around here, the only local one here that seems to be doing this. Apparently, we are apparently the only local one. That's a pretty dumb idea of intelligence, because without the complex necessary social intelligence, the capacity to build machines will get everything dead right quick. So that doesn't look like intelligence to me. That looks like a specific mode of cognition that's extremely dangerous and not actually intelligent at all. Any species that offloads their evolutionary momentum into machine building is going to snuff themselves and their environment in short order. So that just doesn't look intelligent to me, and I I longed to meet other beings who were actually intelligent, partly because I believed that the universe would produce such beings, and partly because they might give us the keys to save our world. And if not our world, at least our minds. Now, I have a variety of topics on my mind today, and I'm not sure which of them I'm going to get to. I'm going to start here. I'm going to bookmark a couple things. So frame collapse, I'm going to call frame collapse, and multiple worlds, but not the physics theory. So I've been listening to Joe Rogan's interviews over the past couple days, first with David Grusch, who I think is a person of high integrity and true patriotic spirit. And what I mean by true patriotic spirit is a very rare kind of thing. Believes in the origins and purposes that underlie our nation's formative urgencies, and is willing to risk everything to preserve, protect, and develop those. There are probably far better urgencies. We're running a nation on an operating system written in the 1700s. We think we're intelligent. That's not intelligent. And in fact, at the level of the level of our collectives, our species is idiotic, catastrophically ignorant, easily captured and mismotivated, inclined to continue with devastatingly stupid orientations, activities, agendas, and so forth. So there's very little intelligent about the dominant features of human beings in our time, human beings as a group. Individual humans, it's easy to find shining examples of brilliance. Collectives, very uncommon. Why is this so? This is a question we should deeply preserve, pursue, and I suggest transform.
The area we were had big boulders that have been sort of...
So the Grusch interview was quite interesting. I learned a number of new things. I've probably heard 6 interviews with him, maybe 7. People may say whatever they like about him. Personally, I consider him a modern hero. He is certainly the flag bearer, the ring bearer of the movement for disclosure in our time. Disclosure being the revelation of what our government, quote unquote, I mean, that's presuming it even belongs to us, which is sort of a ridiculous supposition. It's not our government. It's a government. It's the government that is associated with us, but has its entirely own, it should be very obvious, existence, agendas, motivations, and they are not ours. Right? So, yeah, I mean, that should come as a revelation. The American government is not ours. It's not going to become ours. It's a separate entity, a dumpster fire of competing, highly aggressive, well-defended thrisps, which are dead inside processes that capture groups of humans and deploy them for the furtherance of non-human agendas By non-human agendas, I don't mean alien agendas. I mean agendas born in the absence of our humanity, in the collective behavioral cognition of our species, right? 3 of the very lethal modes of this are commerce, war, and ideology. So, yeah, this is not our government. This is the government associated with where we live. It was never really our government. It didn't, when we were born, it wasn't ours. When we will die, it won't be ours. It won't belong to our children. It didn't belong to our ancestors. You should understand this very clearly. The idea that we have a government is insane. There's no chance of that being true. That's a lethal fiction that we operate under the aegis of daily to our grave detriment. But Grusch came forward and said, this government here has and has long had direct knowledge of non-human intelligences in time-space, visiting Earth with objects, material objects, things that we would call technology, we have recovered or have been given instances of these technologies, including things we would call vehicles. There are a number, at least 10 and possibly as many as 30 vehicles. There are a broad array of objects of a semi or meta-technological nature that this government is and has long been in possession of. There is intelligence about this matter this government is in possession of, and there is no oversight. In other words, you have a breakaway civilization inside this government that is no longer merely human. They're no longer modern humans. They are not us. And what I mean by a breakaway civilization is a civilization in possession of artifacts and or technologies that are advanced so far beyond anything we can even conceive of that they qualify as a different species. Right? If you can imagine a group of humans capable with computers and capable of using them during, say, the Civil War era, this is what we're talking about. Same physical species, not the same technological species. Now, Grusch isn't saying there's a breakaway civilization, but let's be clear, these topics are classified at levels above weapons of mass destruction, nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and so forth. This is the most secret of secret things. And the reason that it's the most secret of secret things is fairly simple. It comprises the Holy Grail of asymmetric advantage over any conceivable terrestrial enemy. And strangely, ironically, lethally and devastatingly, at the group level, our species is absolutely married to war, commerce, prisoneering, ideology, and self-devastation. At the individual level, nothing like that is going on. At the collective level, the kind of animal that we are is absolutely captivated by what I call thrisps, which are essentially artifacts that form in our group, in the dimension of human group cognition, when that dimension of group identity, relation, memory, commitment, orientation, purpose is evacuated. When we depart from that, thrisps are the result. You could imagine something like cancer. You could imagine something like the difference between the untouched Amazon rainforest and dead cities, right? Just imagine cities that just build themselves with robots. They're dead inside. There's nothing in there. It's a good analogy for a thrisp, right? So the dead cities eat the living rainforest and just self-replicate lethal dead structure, whose primary purpose is simply the production of further dead structure. In this case, rather than in the Amazon rainforest, it's in the network of minds comprised by human beings and the other living networks that we humans draw our origin, purpose, spirit, and dreaming from, which would be all the living beings of Earth and, in fact, beings far beyond the Earth, beings who are not merely material. So Grusch, was being persecuted. He was tasked with determining if such black projects exist that are oriented to hide and reverse engineer retrieved non-human technologies. He discovered that there were in fact such black projects. And then he started being persecuted, not surprisingly, and threatened, and so forth. So he went directly to the Inspector General of the intelligence community and, dumped data about the history of this situation. Mainly so that he could be in some way protected from reprisal, but also because what's going on is illegal, right? It's a violation of the concept of a constitutional government, democracy, so forth. Because what we apparently have here, or what exists here, whether we have it or not, is a relatively modest group of humans within the U.S. military that are operating without oversight and are essentially stealing funds from other projects and then hiding that extortion. So, this has been going on now look, people have been trying to bring this to light for probably more than 50 years in our nation, in this nation, and mostly failing. And suffering murder, threat, derision, the obliteration of their social or personal or vocational identities, histories, potentials, and so forth. So Grusch, in some ways he's Frodo, right, in the Lord of the Rings, right? He's the ring bearer. He's the one on whose shoulders this has landed. And I really don't care what anyone has to say There's no way this guy was motivated by self-interest. If he was motivated by self-interest, he would maintain his clearances and continue to ascend the essentially endless ladder of privilege and pay in the top branches of the United States military. Are you kidding me? Right? Like, you know, what someone thinks like, oh, he's, you know, trying to make money or something. There's no money in this for him. He's trying to stay alive. He's trying to keep his family alive. And he's trying to reveal in a way that can't be rolled back a series of catastrophic agendas and situations within the government of the United States in the closed stacks, so to speak, of the libraries of our government. So, you know, that was an interesting interview. I knew most of what Grusch spoke of there, and he's limited in what he can speak of because he has to have a thing called Dobster clearance, and he has to completely, perfectly fail to violate that. So he can say what he has been authorized. No, he can say what he hasn't been forbidden from saying. But if he veers much from that, they're going to come for him. And there's a lot of people hoping that he's going to do that, right? Because they just want him to veer a tiny bit from the way he crosses one of those T's or dots one of those I's in what he's sharing. And they'll arrest him or silence him or revoke his clearances or, you know, whatever steps can be taken at the official logistical and legal level to get that guy off the playing board. He's a big thorn in the side of many. So then today I was listening to Rogan interviewing George Knapp, who's, you know, been at this for, what is this? You know, has been a pro-disclosure, someone working for disclosure for like 36 years. Long time. And also Jeremy Corbell, who is a little more recent in his commitment to the to the mission. And again, what's the mission? It's layered, right? Layer one, tell human beings we're not alone. We know for a fact that we're not alone in the universe. There's no chance of that being true. And we've known this for a long time. There are other intelligences. It's not entirely clear that they're merely biological the way we are. I am also aware that there are other forms of intelligence. There are field intelligences that are probably the origin of our minds, without which we wouldn't have consciousness or anything like it. And there seems to be a ladder of forms of intelligence, each of which contribute something to both the ladder and the orders above and below them. So, for example, around here, the plants and the microorganisms are profoundly advanced intelligences, physicalizations, platforms, if you will, that contribute up and down scale to the possibility of the existence of our minds, the minds of animals. We think, who knows what we think? At the collective level, we're relatively stupid because we are easily captured by ideological inhibitions, nonsense. So like reductionism and materialism have dominated our species. At the collective level for a very long time. Well, a long modern time. I don't know. A couple, 300-400 years or something maybe? And those two ideologies are blinding, stupefying, and mechanizing. You can imagine, bless you, you can imagine some sort of comic book scenario, right, where like a human lives in a caged off area or in a box, and outside it there are trillions of forms and modes of other intelligences, but in its backyard it only sees, a few examples of other beings that it can convince itself aren't intelligent because they don't make machines. Let me just be really clear about something. Any cell in your body outperforms the entire history and future of human-forged machines 3 billion times per second. There's no need for anything resembling machines. None. Nature is billions of light years beyond anything resembling the necessity of mechanization. All of the things we think we need machines for, we don't need machines for those things. And since we're developing only machines, we've lost access to the meta-technologies that are implicit in nature. And these include the ability to travel anywhere instantaneously, to not merely touch other minds telepathically, but forge networks of them. Anything you can, instantaneous healing, probably resurrection of the dead, anything you can possibly imagine, with the exception of war, or the need for commerce, or prisons, or anything like this. The actual situation that we're in bears no resemblance to our common suppositions and the ideologies that dominate our common layer of thought, supposition, expectation, cosmology, science, so forth. If you're alone, you're going to need machines. If you belong to the families, the time-space is the standing wave body for, you will never need a machine. And so some people say, well, then why are there UFOs and so forth? Yeah, well, you might not need machines, but it doesn't mean you'll never forge them. There's a difference, though, between The difference between intelligences that forge machines and intelligences that are dominated by them is that the latter are quickly snuffed by the results of their own defection from life. It's not a problem to forge the occasional machine. You know, having a couple of automobiles isn't a big deal. Having billions of them competing with the anciently preserved ecologies of our world, that's a deadly deal. So there are, throughout time-space, biological and parabiological peoples who do forge something at least vaguely resembling machines, presuming that the things that we have, the things in the possession of our government are that kind of thing, right, are a machine. And, probably part of the reason why our government has been unable to properly reverse engineer these things is that they're not merely machines. They involve principles that we have no analog for. They are, if they are piloted, they're not piloted mechanically. Most likely they're piloted by consciousness. So now in order for our government to do anything with these, we need humans who have the capacity to touch objects with consciousness and manipulate them that way. They don't have levers and wheels and things inside them. Many of them are probably single objects, right? Have no parts. There's no parts. They might have features, but not parts. So today I was listening to Corbell and Knapp talk about kind of the history and a bit more in depth from outside of Grusch's experience, what's been going on with him, and that's been quite fascinating. I learned a lot from that conversation. This is some downstream intelligence, from after the time when this government forged some documentation and what do we call this? Some legal structure around the topic for fiscal 2024 appropriation of military budgets. There's legislation that wow. There's some other intelligence right there. There's legislation that orbits the disclosure of these situations and that authorizes Congress and the House to go after factions within this government and within the private commercial sector that have been involved in this situation. It sort of gives them a sort of truth and reconciliation. I'm not talking about the Halo video game level. Of course, I kind of am. Where, come forward, let us know, we'll relieve you of responsibility. Don't let us know, we'll come for you, kind of thing. So that was gutted. My understanding is that the legislation was gutted to some degree. And there are particular people in the government, the gentleman whose donors include Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, etc., and whose district includes Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is historically infamous in this fiasco. Can't recall their names at the moment. Not too hard to find them. There's a couple of people that have shut down the the public hearings and so forth, a couple of, senators or congressmen. These guys are idiots. They're people with historical records of catastrophic misdeeds. They're shills. Right? They're straight up shills. So that's been going on since last year. There have been some hearings, at least two. One major one where Grusch, David Fravor, and another, ace fighter pilot, and another pilot, Ryan Graves, maybe? I'm not trying to remember all the names at the moment. Where these folks all testified about this matter. To the degree that it would become futurally impossible to make ridiculous claims like there's nothing there, these are nutcases, these are just crazy people, which, this is what's been going on to hide the phenomena on purpose. They lit up crazy people on purpose and then pointed at them and laughed publicly for the past 50 years to produce a smokescreen about the topic in the public eye. So the first layer is to reveal to the public that we're not alone. We're not the only game in town, in time, in space, even around here. We're not. We never have been. And the second layer is that this has long been being hidden, primarily because it's, like I said, the Holy Grail of asymmetric war advantage, or asymmetric commercial advantage, or asymmetric slavery, enslaving advantage. And at the group level, our completely disoriented species, captured by Thris, is highly motivated in these three areas. Enslave, imprison, slaughter, commit omnicide, kill everything you can, turn that into products, stack up representations of that value in banks, concentrate the value in 0.02% of the living human population for one lifetime, burn down the future, obliterate the historical past, lie like there's no tomorrow, rape the children, burn the mothers, just like demons, straight up demons, right? So yeah, these are the motivating forces that are arrayed against us. And people are concerned about which president wins? Well, of course, there is some concern. There's good reasons for that concern. But at this point, at this late point, if, this is kind of a ridiculous analogy, but if human civilization, if we metaphorically analogize human civilization as the construction and preservation of the giant double penis with no testicles that used to dwell in New York, right, the Twin Towers, then what's going on right now is that the charges have been detonated inside the structure of the building. The charges have been detonated. The things are falling. The planes have crashed. The charges detonated. The things are falling, and we're arguing about, who gets to stand on the top floor while the thing collapses. It's a catastrophic disorientation of our human potential and nature, history and future. Watching the sickly sewage-rich froth bubbling on the surface of our present moment in human history is terrifying and demoralizing for all of us. We are not, our families, our histories, our lineages, and when I say those words, I mean the living places we arose in and for. Our families include the sky, the moon, the sun, the mountain, the forest, the river, the desert, the ocean, the animals, the plants, the insects, all of the water creatures. These are our families. They are being put to the torch in our lifetimes for the sake of disorientations too absurd to imagine, let alone pursue. And yet, this is where, quote, we, unquote, are now. And it seems that we are incapable. Hi. That seeming is wrong. It's not true. It seems that we are incapable of forming anything that could. We don't need to fight against what's happening. That's one misconception. Any kind of war is going to lead to more war. The planet and we are too delicate at this point for war. So this is one of the other layers, right? The third layer is the lie that there's a government that represents us. It doesn't. It never did. Let me be really clear. We have been alive for X number of years. The government is older than us. It's a structured array of lethal fictions we inherit at birth. It's bullshit. It's deadly. The fact that you have the better version of cancer than the other people on the planet, that will not fucking help you. Ever. Right? If we're to have anything resembling our humanity, we have to forge something worth living in and for together. And this will not be a set of structured agreements. It will be a set of relational prodigies, ways of playing at being human together that are so beautiful, restorative, medicinal, developmentally profound and amazing that no one's willing to be left out. That direction is open. That door is open. Everything in the history and future of life on this world wants the humans to become uncaptured. So there are ways of starting on a small scale, 3 to 5 people, that quickly become extremely effective and profound and contagious and don't involve war.
Where I parked, there was no reserve sign, but I think
that's where hope, that's one of the directions in which hope is alive for this planet. All right, so let's see here. By the way, that little vocal move that I made there was that's my father's voice. It's not mine. It's my dad. My dad's voice. That was one of his vocal idiosyncrasies. I just recognized it playing in me. You know, we think we are individuals. It's insane. What I am is like, imagine a billion thread lines of history and relation from every part of nature and the sky. And these billion thread lines have a kind of a bubbling forefront, a wave front in time-space. That's what I am. I'm not Darren. I'm not merely human. That's what we are. And if we don't have access to that because of some fiction where I think I'm Darren or Darren's important or any of that kind of thing, it's not that I'm not. It's that letting the aspect of me that thinks that's important drive the car is insane, because there's, 9 billion forms of intelligence supporting me, that if I would just let them synthesize and symphonize together, if I would just let them orchestrate, there's no chance logic can outperform that. There's no chance rationality, conceptual thought, even what we think of as mathematics. There's no chance of those useful artifacts outperforming their origins if their origins are free to fuse and synergize and see and learn and grow and anamnese together, to unforget together. You know, there is something weird going on here on Earth, which I don't think is universal, which is a kind of a forgetting. Metaphorized in the Greek myth of the river Lethe, in which we are dipped between lives so that we forget all that came before. An anamnesis is the reversal of that tragedy in us. You know, some portion of the question surrounding the existence of what we think of as UFOs and alien life, probably a good portion of that question, has to do with our own origin as a species. Because let's be really clear, I'm not an expert, but listening to many experts, the chances that we evolved here on Earth by mere mechanical accident, as reductionist materialism supposes, in my view, chance of that, 0.000000001 or less. And, you know, roll the dice. How many times do you have to roll the dice to come up with that? Right? Well, trillions and trillions and trillions of times, and then finally you get that result. So, yeah, there's no chance that we just evolve mechanically. Do humans look like a natural result of evolutionary processes on Earth to you? Is that what we look like to you? Because look around. There's precisely one representational cognitive on this planet. One. There's exactly one animal. Capable of completely defecting from all relationships into mechanism, into commodity, into war. Into attacking the reflection of its absence in the mirror of biorelational progeny. That's a weird fucking accident. Something went horribly sideways for that to occur. I have precisely zero suspicion that humans evolved without the direct intervention, influence, or engineering of other intelligences. And indeed, you know, our religions, directly or indirectly, and as insane as many of them are, and I don't mean insane in the good way, I mean insane in the broken way. Most of them, if they don't directly say that this is what has taken place, they imply something similar. That we were intentionally engineered. We were made. And there appear to be a number of stories that very specifically, at least if we listen to maniacs, half-brilliant maniacs like Randall Carlson, that specifically detail something that sounds an awful lot like the careful genetic evolution, genetic engineering of our species. in what? Sumerian tablets, which I guess there are many thousands. Now, I'm not using those as evidence. I think you can just look at the situation, right? Here on Earth, look around at the rest of nature and look at us. Do we look like the same thing? Because we don't to me. I mean, when I see automobiles, I'm seeing something that doesn't belong in nature at all. And, there are people who will say, well, nature is really weird, like anything, it's the encompassing super container, so anything that appears in nature is natural. Yes, from one perspective, that's absolutely true. From a conceptual perspective, nature is the super container for all that is. So it's the same thing as saying everything. So you can't then, from that perspective, there's nothing that's unnatural. But from the perspective of biorelational intelligence, there's nothing that I can understand about nature that on a living planet would produce omnicidal maniacs like modern Homo sapiens. Machines. And this is a question I've chased for a long time. Okay, so is what we have this word. The word is artificial. And what we mean by that, usually, we can mean different things with it, depending on who's talking and where. Words don't have meanings, we use them to mean things to each other. But what is generally meant is human engineered. And this word we use to distinguish between what a world without humans would naturally produce and what humans, as we know ourselves, produce. Artificial. So, it looks to me like our species is a strange example of defection from nature that I want to highlight and emphasize and pay very careful attention to. Because the history and future of life on Earth may very well depend on making this specific distinction. Right? Our ability to make this distinction intelligently, with awareness, understanding, insight, recognition of the face of origin, the face of living beings, and the difference between that face and the face of our species at the group level. Because that's a staggering difference. It's the difference between a sunrise and the detonation of a nuclear weapon. If you can't see that difference, my God, what can you see? You are blind. You are blind in a way that will just generate further blindnesses in order to justify the blindnesses that have gone, unopposed thus far. That sound is the opposite of omnicidal fury. That's the sound, not of speech, but of anciently originating and conserved intelligence, transcendence, origin. So beautiful, so true. Absolutely authentic. That's a signal whose content you can absolutely trust, and whose content may be so profound. Who knows what's in there, right? Who knows what's in that signal? That's a signal towards transcendence. That's a signal towards the resurrection of the possibilities of intelligence. There's no defection. There's no deception. There's no agenda of... Ma'am, I think you dropped one of your bags back there.
Oh, thank you.
Certainly. You see, when I began to speak with the older woman, in the beginning of my speech, she had to go through a series of phases, communication phases, where she evaluated signal for a variety of features, right? Is the signal deceptive? Is the signal predatory? Is the signal opportunistic? And as I was speaking, she was doing these evaluations. I could see her doing them. She did not meet my eyes. This is what is known as signal intelligence. And it's fundamental to having minds that have boundaries, right? It's fundamental to us and themism. So she had to go through a cascade of evaluations. And after the first ones I mentioned, then came things like, is the signal useful? Is it intelligent? Is it operationally coherent? Does it matter? Is it important? Is it significant? Right? Significant. All these things. Now, this is what's going on every time we speak or encounter information. We're doing the same cascade. The problem is that the orienting, gatekeeping intelligences or features, what I would call sentinels in consciousness, can be captured. They can be overwhelmed, right? And social media is made of the tactics that overwhelm these sentinels. So is commercial media. Even private media has to compete, right? So people like Banksy employ coding strategies that produce the desire to replicate the signal. Knapp, in the interview with Rogan. Actually, I'm going to go back to Grusch. Grusch was talking about his specialization in forms of intelligence and technological, weaponized technology that fall under the aegis of cyber war. And what he was saying was that part of the current landscape, or the landscape when this was current for him, was something we could call attribution obfuscation, right? So an event occurs, let's say you obliterate the power grid of a nation, right? That's a tactically effective. That's a tactically asymmetric, effective military advantage. But another part of the if your goal is to fuck people up or kill them or obliterate the coherence of their, structured relationships, then there's other layers, right? Like you can obfuscate who did it, or you can plant evidence that makes it look like it came from so-and-so when actually it came from thus and such. And you can also, there's all kinds of sort of signal intelligence aspects of war. And I mean, one can easily cause an enemy to obliterate themselves for you with the right kinds of obfuscation technology and attribution error. I'm not going to detail a variety of scenarios to you, but imagine that the United States, thinks that Russia has launched nukes at it. In fact, there are no nukes flying. The U.S. responds as though nukes are flying,
Our house?
and ends up gone. I mean, that's a really crudely modeled toy of a situation where you take down large portions of the United States. Yeah, let's look at a better one. Let's say you can take down immediately large portions of the United States energy grid, and then attribute it to a foreign actor that had no involvement. You can take out both enemies at the same time, right? The United States will try to take out their perceived enemy. Meanwhile, that perceived enemy had no knowledge or functional relationship to the event, and so forth. So these are SIG-int, the weaponization of SIG-int, and identity in conflict, right? Weaponizing identity in conflict. So we've come a long way here. I think what Grusch was talking about in his concerns about cyber war was that the United States is developing technologies that are uncontrollably powerful, particularly with the advent of what we're referring to as artificial intelligence. And so are other nations, and that's going to lead to a race to the bottom of weaponized computational technologies. Rogan seems to think we are a meat caterpillar engineered to produce a mechanical butterfly. I gotta say, like, Rogan's cosmological speculations are among the least interesting things I've ever had the misfortune of listening to, even if they are relatively sophisticated, just because of his position, right? His position is integrative, right? He's standing over a vast array of intelligent and amazing and insightful human beings. He's the linchpin that links all those together. So that's a highly privileged position. And actually, an intelligent person would go for a position like that very intentionally. Not entirely dissimilar to Alan Steinfeld's position in the UFO, paranormal, non-ordinary, near-death community, shamanism, so forth, communities. That's the sign of a very advanced intelligence, to get into the between of all those minds. So before I'm about to come to a place where there's a lot more noise, unfortunately, but I'm going to talk briefly about the ideas that were in my mind when I first began this recording. So many of you have heard the term synchronicity, and it's hard to know exactly what this means. Once again, we use terms to mean things to each other rather than them just having a meaning, as we might otherwise suppose. Outside of a meaningful conversation, terms don't have much of a meaning. They just have denotations, right? But synchronicity is commonly taken to mean something resembling a meaningful or benevolent or dangerous array, a cascade of what we would think of as coincidences. The other afternoon, I was in my basement, and I was thinking about a text I had sent 3 days ago to a friend, in which it was clear we had the tempo of the communication had been broken, right? So we were texting back and forth every few minutes, and then, I texted him and nothing came back. So 2 or 3 days later, I was in my basement and I was taking out the garbage, and I thought for a moment, I brought to mind the sequence of that conversation. When I went back up the stairs and looked at my phone, he had responded. And that's not a mere coincidence. That's what I would call an incidence of communicative telepathy, which I've had enough experiences of to know what that feels like, what it looks like, and the difference between that. Like one of my frenemies likes to say, yeah, you just think it's telepathy because you're not counting the times it failed. Well, here's the number of times it failed. Never. Because the thing that he's calling a failure doesn't look the same or feel the same as the thing that actually succeeds. But yeah, imagine that you're driving through a city, and every time you come to a light, it's green for like half an hour. There's an example. Now, it's possible that you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, but not over 50, stoplights. Not likely. So synchronicity usually is used to mean a sequence of non-ordinary coincidences, and often there is something like this that happens around the event horizon of a non-ordinary the emergence of non-ordinary awareness, intelligence. Or experience in a human or a small group of them. Sometimes a large group. Mostly a small group, though. And there's a related phenomenon that we don't usually talk about. Someone said, for example, to me this morning that my posts on Facebook had often had a peculiar resonance with what was going on in their life at the around the time that they found that they encountered these posts. And this brought to mind something I discovered fairly recently. I was probably aware of the principle before, didn't have any reasonable way to talk about it. So here's how it works. If you set up, and this is what can breed madness, mania, paranoia, megalomania, grandiosity, schizogenic profusion of conceptual linkages of symbols in experience, but it can also breed insight. The others are more common, but insight is possible. So what it is if you set up in consciousness a set of symbols or persons or situations that you're constantly paying attention to in such a way that it feels like, or may indeed be true, that your future, or your well-being, or the well-being of your family or loved ones, depends upon changes, having a clear understanding of changes in these persons, situations, and so forth. We all do this. We set up these sort of monuments in consciousness. that our lives and minds orbit. And when we do that, we're setting the the character of the frame. Yeah, setting the character of the frame. So sometimes we can allow the character of the frame to be set for us by external symbols. For example, I just walked past a book kiosk in my neighborhood. Now suppose that I took the titles of those books as precognitively predictive of what I should pay attention to in consciousness. Right? So I'm going to replace whatever framing I might have previously had with the titles of those books, and then I'm going to proceed through the rest of my day. Perhaps I could go back and read those titles right now, just to give you an example. I think I don't need to. I can do something simpler. I'm going to take the sequence of letters and symbols on this license plate, 8ZHY640, and the one that follows it, 8RXZ199. Right? Now, if I keep reading the license plates, what's going to happen? I'm going to notice correspondences. Right? And even if I don't replace the ones I have, like I have some, right? Is my heart doing okay? How's my house? How about my roommate? Otherwise known as Let's Talk UFOs on on Reddit, who I love. Right? My bank accounts, the people with whom I'm in fairly regular contact, the one or two people who either depend on me or I depend on. Those beings are all significant, we call them anchors in my consciousness, right? So if you replace those anchors with something, or you add a new anchor and it becomes very interesting to you, perhaps a love interest or someone you're afraid of, right? Someone you feel is somebody who someone has a reason to feel is conspiring to harm them, perhaps physically, relationally, vocationally, or especially magically. You can see that what tends to happen is if you set up the frame, then reality warps in consciousness toward the things you've set up as anchors, right? So this produces the semblance of synchronicity, and it's not actually that there isn't any, it's just that it's not necessarily particularly non-ordinary. Consciousness orients itself with anchors. This is well known in NLP, right? Neuro-linguistic programming. Hypnosis circles, magicians know this. Illusionists know it. Darren Brown is a brilliant provocateur who utilizes this to astonish ordinary humans and to manipulate them. It must be a very lonely and perhaps grandiose life, although I don't know what Darren Brown's life is like. It's very difficult for me to imagine. I do know, or at least I have heard, that the castle that he owns has many instances of, what is that stuff called? What is that stuff called? Not stuffed animals, but preserved, carefully embalmed creatures. Yeah, the word almost came to me. A book has just arrived. Do I take this as significant? It's Paul Elward's Selected Writings, which I found the book cover for in my room but could not locate the volume for. Gosh. Yeah, I can't. My hippocampus is failing to find the word. It's on the edge of my tongue, and I'm sure it'll come to me. So, we create the anchors that our sentinels, our watchers, pay attention to, and then we interpret reality according to transformations in the field in between the anchors. Right? So this is likely to look metaphysically significant. If somebody's, for example, if someone is paying inordinate attention to my posts and the time and the day on which they occur, it's very likely that there will be two effects. One, an interpretive effect, where they will feel that I'm precognitive or in some way influencing their situation. And the second one, more like the latter, that I may be predictively aware or actively, magically, so to speak, transforming their situation. And this is what I want to highlight as frame collapse. So we should be aware, okay, this is a power for those of us who understand it. It's not a power to manipulate other human beings. That's a malignant use of power. It's a power to transform situations, if we understand it clearly. It's a power to transform our own minds, our futures, our destinies, our memories, our dreaming, our relationships. It's this kind of a power. So we should, but it's also a danger, right? It's a danger in that we may think we're having metaphysical insight or experience when actually what is happening is our consciousness is responding to the peculiar way we have set up. That's interesting. That's familiar to me. I wonder if this book is around. The peculiar way we have set up the the anchors in concern, right? In interest and in awareness. Right? Yeah, that's okay. It's a little bit old, but it's all right with me. I have my Paul Elward book that I have long had the cover to, but can't find the book for. By the way, I love me some Paul Elward. Of course, in translation, I guess. All right, so pay attention to the possibilities, not merely of frame collapse, but of frame establishment. If we can select really good anchors, we're going to get a completely different mode of awareness, possibilities of learning, intelligence, sensitivity, possibilities of fulfilling the purposes for which we establish sentinels in the first place, especially if we do this together, right? Because these potentials are radically magnified in even small groups of highly motivated, highly relationally motivated individual humans. And then I'm just going to touch on the second topic, the multiple world topic, before I wrap up for today. So, yes, of course, there's this multiple world theory in physics, whatever, who cares? I doubt it. I very, very much doubt it. I think that theory will either be overturned or be shown to have been extremely partial. In other words, what you get are tiny little para-candidate universes, most of which never persist or only partially emerge. But I think the theory is a misunderstanding of something fundamental about nature and time-space. I strongly suspect that anyway. So yeah, what I want to talk about is different. What I want to talk about is that there are billions of worlds right here. Okay, we think the world matches up with our usually extremely limited experience and awareness of it. We think we know what the world is, what humans are, what's being done, what isn't being done, who's doing it, who isn't doing it, what's possible, what isn't, what's historically accurate, what isn't, what's futurially accessible, what isn't. All these things, we think we know them based on the incredibly narrow little slice of reality that we get exposed to, most of us. And some of us have realized through experiment and so forth that, wow, if we step outside that slice, things get really astonishingly diverse and interesting, right? So, for example, I have never traveled. My little slice of reality is super tiny as far as my human stuff goes. Nature, a bit different than most humans. Time-space, different from most humans, because I've had contact with non-human intelligences. And very, very few humans who claim that have had anything resembling coherent contact with NHI. But my little slice of life, if I were to determine what the world is, based on what media reaches me and blah-blah-blah-blah, I'd be thinking about the world from the perspective of less than, a 1,000,000% of it. So what I want to make clear is that what's actually going on, the world, is billions of worlds. There are worlds of human life so far beyond anything you've ever imagined that they might as well be other universes. And they're all around us. Ordinarily, what limits us to some degree, the two primary limiting factors in our world are proximity and wealth. Wealth doesn't totally liberate you. In fact, it can trap you in many ways if you start out with it, especially. But, a close friend has lived a life of not entire impoverishment, but relative poverty. And he lives in a place where, it seems like his prospects are very limited. Recent events have demonstrated to him that they might be far less limited than he'd ever imagined, and that there might even be a couple of avenues to what, could qualify as space flight for him in terms of his lived experience of being human on Earth. So what I'm trying to get at is, there are groups of people and people who are so profoundly advanced and fascinating and alive, intelligent and confusing, brilliant, so forth, that are nothing like what we think the world is like. This is a world of a billion worlds. People who travel eventually get some kind of a taste of this. I have never done that. I know from having been above, I know from having what the overview effect that space travelers have experienced, which happened to William Shatner and many of the astronauts, right? They see, oh my God, this is a tiny little droplet of water in a vast immensity. Unimaginable. So what I want you to understand is, do not ever think that your capacities are limited to what you've experienced thus far. If you can find a way to achieve meaningful, coherent escape velocity from the tiny little slice of life that you've become habituated to and that is familiar to you and may feel safe even if it's miserable, outside that there is a billion universes right here on this planet. The continents are different worlds. Think about history, right? Think about what was going on in what we call Peru when Egypt was thriving. What was going on in China when Egypt was thriving. What was going on in Antarctica before it was frozen. There are many worlds right here, and there are billions of unique human worlds. Indeed, every little shop or home that you enter is like a womb or a universe. It's unique, it's profound, it's a completely different way of life. So I may pursue this topic further in upcoming recordings. I'm only giving it a provisional sort of tail end glance before I wrap up here for today. But as always, I'm so grateful to have this time with you. So thankful for those of you who pay attention to my recordings, and particularly those of you who support them, like them, share them, ask questions, leave comments, and so forth, since that's, if you're getting some value here, remember that I don't allow advertising, right? Which would be really ironic if I did, so I can't, right? There's no way. So it's your support, right, that I depend on. And I'm just so grateful to have this time together. And I'm really looking forward to our next adventures in awareness, anamnesis, and mutual wonder. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. May your ways be blessed and beautiful, and may your dreams be profound and rich as your relationships.